Watch The Toxic Avenger now on Screambox. The radioactive superhero that's certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes is available to watch now from the comfort of your home. Bloody FM listeners get a special introductory offer by going to bit.ly/ToxyFM. That's bit.ly/TOXIEFM for a special offer on Screambox.
Sometimes you gotta do something.
Welcome to Safe Room, your weekly source for horror gaming discussions and proudly part of Bloody Disgusting's Bloody FM podcast network. I'm your host, Jay Krieger.
And I'm the other one, Neil Bolt.
And for this week's episode, we're going to be discussing what makes a good video game movie adaptation. Neil, you have some things to report on as well, do you not?
I do, yeah. We are delving into the world of film review because we are getting an abundance of horror game adaptations. So I've braved the screens and gone to see both Return to Silent Hill and Iron Lung.
And it's great that, while we don't always chat about film on a Safe Room, at the same time, you've picked two to chat about that are not only timely, but they are at the opposite ends sort of the spectrum, right? Considering that Return to Silent Hill is quite literally a return for director Christoph Gans within that universe. But then Iron Lung is coming from a director who has no previous directorial experience in that regard for a feature film. So that's a great sort of, range, if you will, for us to sort of chat about what makes a great video game movie adaptation. And then we'll be getting into naturally how we usually round out. And then we'll be getting into how we usually round out the show, which will be our general grab bag of games we've been playing this week. And we'll be chatting about games such as the recently released, I believe, Hungry Horrors, of a few years ago, Burnhouse Lane, an adventure horror game, amongst other games that we've been playing this week. But before we dive into this week's feature on video game movie adaptations, a bit of housekeeping. As a reminder, as Horror Bites has gone bi-weekly as of now, this week we'll have a brand new episode where Neil and I will be delving into, once again, our theme of the month, which was detective games. So you guys should be sure to come back on Thursday and check out the last episode for that theme. And we'll be kickstarting a brand new theme after that. But yeah, we're looking forward to kind of getting to play a couple more games that combined detective themes with, of course, horror. But in getting into our feature of the week, I'll just pose the question and we can kind of go from there. What makes a good film adaptation of a video game? Because as we know, there are plenty of them, seemingly a never-ending list of them, and yet the number of ones that have succeeded, you could probably count on one hand.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? It's a question that I think in the last few weeks, having watched, I think, 3, would make me go, well, is there one way? Like, probably not. I mean, the weird thing is, it's often films that aren't directly like video game movies that just end up having video game logic. Like Sisu Road to Revenge. I was talking to you recently about that and said that it's just the most video game movie. In fact, it does stuff that a video game would be ashamed to do. I think at times it gets that ludicrous. But it's stuff like that. It's going back as far as something like Crank, isn't it? Where it has the internal logic of video games and that's quite fun. Like that, again, that's fine. But obviously we're talking about horror here. And I mean, that's already tricky to do because I think a lot of horror video games, especially the big hitters, came from being inspired by certain horror films. So, for Silent Hill, you had stuff like Jacob's Ladder, as we know, and Resident Evil films and games have been influenced by God knows what. I mean, John Carpenter's was one of those ones that came out of that for me, as well as George Romero in those early Resident Evil games. And then, I don't know, I suppose, do you think you would start with what influenced the games first and think, okay, how can I turn that into the film like that? And I suppose it's a fear, isn't it? Then it's like, do you really want to make an adaptation that's very blatantly copying stuff from other films? Because people do complain about that, but it
Mhm.
happens all the time. Just how subtle you are with it. And unfortunately, yes, early Resident Evil games, especially, are not subtle about where they get their influences from.
Yeah.
There's you could write like a novel on the amount of nods that are in like Resident Evil 2 alone, in terms of like that. But you can do certain things and do things a certain way. I suppose, like any adaptation, it's like how seriously you take what you're doing as an adaptation, and it's always like a worry when you see a director in an interview like saying, "Oh yeah, I love video games. I played Pong or something like back in the day." Like, and it's like, "Yeah, okay, so you're not gonna understand how video games work now, then," sort of thing. Um, but yeah, I mean that's we've had people who are video game fans make video game movies, and
Mm.
even then, like whether it's them or whether it's ratings they got to pare down for, or like studios saying, no, we really want it to go this way or that way, expectations are not met,
Yeah.
and for various reasons, and it's become so complicated now in terms of like how do you do it. You could do it simple, but I don't know, at the same time that would work if you're trying to make money, I guess,
Mm.
but probably less so if you're trying to be artistically different. Like, I think it's
Mm.
like it's. I mean, the greatest example, of course, in terms of like successful, uh, is the Resident Evil movies.
Mm.
In terms of financial success, anyway. But they're terrible movies, and they piss on the video games in terms of what they story is, the characters, to the point many fans like myself get very angry about certain entries and what they do to certain characters. Resident Evil Apocalypse is a great example of that, where I
Mm.
just, to this day, it just fills me with a white hot rage. That's Nemesis. This thing again when we talk about they're riffing on the Terminator. Great, do the Terminator
Yeah.
with a bioweapon. No, we're going to have someone kung fu fight him, beat him up, and make him cry. And yeah, that's just wrong. And we're going to turn Jill Valentine into like the silver medalist of the film as well. Yeah, and so that's one thing. And even when you get films that are supposedly doing justice to because they'll have like certain set pieces or whatever, it's like you look at it and you go, yeah, okay, they got this and that right, but in most cases, like, yeah, but the game probably did it better, looked better doing it,
Mm.
and you had the involvement. I mean, this
Mhm.
is always the problem with video game movies in general. Is like the thing about video games is you are involved in a way you aren't in any other medium.
Yeah.
You aren't. A book is your imagination does a lot of the driving force of it. It's understandable. But here, yeah, you have an engagement that just will not come over, and so when you do have something that has a little story, like what do you do? Do you make something that's going to subvert what's already there? Do you build out your own sort of story, which Resident Evil as a series did, and but then went the other way
Mm.
and tried to be faithful, but then tried to stuff too much in Welcome to Raccoon City, where they tried to fit the entirety of Resident Evil 1 and 2.
Right.
But it also committed the sin of fucking with characters and making them weird and wrong, and like that's understandable. Again, like a common thing in adaptation, even beyond video games, is you do sort of mush some characters together. But I mean, in that film, they made Wesker a good guy, basically,
Right. Yeah.
and changed that whole weird sort of superhuman origin thing that he had. Yeah, I know Leon gets complained about in that film, but I think Evan Yogia is quite good like that. As in, when Leon is in Resident Evil 2, he is just like a wet behind the ears, naive doofus, and like
Mhm.
the idea is that he gets to evolve into the ass kicking, cheesy line Leon Kennedy that we get later. That's the beauty of that sort of evolution. But yeah, there are just so many characters where it's like, oh, they got this right, they got that right, and you have hope, but there's always something. And like the easy thing would have been to just make it one of the games, make it the first one. But I get it, like it's, as we'll probably go and do in the reviews, it's like I think it's when they want to be timely, and I think because the most relevant Resident Evil at that time was the remake of 2, in terms of going back to that. So that's where they sort of focused most of it, in terms of like how Claire looks in outfit and stuff. So I think that's probably why they ended up doing too much too soon. I mean, these are like still like the most notable examples. There are just so many beyond that. Everyone knows the terrible U-Bowl films of sort of like Alone in the Dark, and various other ones like Blood Rain. But there's underwhelming stuff, and as we've said, is the reason for that are multitudes of them. There's just so many things that can go wrong, and the thing that gets thrown at video games normally is like, well, they don't have good writing by film standards or good stories by film standards, and yes, that was generally true. I think back then a lot with the bigger games, but now I think you can do stuff and have decent stories, and again, it just comes down to that problem of immersion, and players have to be engaged with a game. But I'm talking myself to a hole here. But at the same time, you have the YouTube streaming generation that don't play the games so much as watch them and watch other people play them and react to them. Which again, when we come into the reviews later, is like I think is quite interesting in terms of how that worked for Iron Lung. But it's like, what audience are you catering for? And in most cases, the people who are in charge of this don't know what video games are, don't understand that. They see they make lots of money, but they don't get why. And they try to put it through the lens of other kinds of business and media, and hence why the industry is in the state it is. Why you have people who've made like all-time classic games turn around going, why would you want to play that anymore, like sort of thing. Like, why would you want to play this classic game we made? People don't play old things anymore. It's like, it's true, you would not have that in the movie industry. You're like, watch a film before 1990, what are you on, mad? Like sort of thing. It's like, I know games have aged in a very different way because of technology, but the same is true of films. It's just like it's easy to be more consistent with what films are. And I don't think a lot of higher ups in Hollywood have really understood what games are to the point where they would leave someone alone to make that. I think if we're lucky, as much as I don't like Zach Cregger's films so far, I think he's got the power now and the chops to make a Resident Evil movie that will actually be good. Like, because I think he's already said he's not taking on the stories are already there. He's going to do something else. And one of the strengths of Resident Evil, I think, is that you have all these little anecdotal things in notes and stuff. And that's obviously not the only horror game that's ever done it, that allow you to do that allow you to go and tell all these different little stories. I was talking to you before, like about Johann Roberts' Primate, which he's obviously made after doing Welcome to Raccoon City, and it does often feel like one of those notes you read, about like something happened to the monkey, it got bit, now it's gone crazy and done all this crazy shit sort of thing. And the gore and the meanness to it feels more like a Resident Evil film than the Resident Evil film he made sort of thing. Which felt like someone putting a bunch of their Resident Evil toys together and sort of making up their own story sort of thing. It's so tricky, isn't it, to just really get into the bottom of it, and mainly because we don't make films, so we're not qualified to sort of say that. But from the gaming side of things, I think it's just another one of those cases, I think, where it's not getting the right people caught up with the medium, and I think unfortunately with the way things have gone, it's probably unlikely that's going to happen anytime soon, unless we have the right circumstances, which, as I said, we'll probably go into when we talk about Iron Lung. I think that you can, with the right people, the right circumstances, find the right methods to get there, even if they don't necessarily turn out 100% perfect or anything. it's shown promise of a way that we might be able to get something a bit more authentic, if you will, in terms of
Mm.
like addressing video game adaptations.
Yeah, that authenticity, I think, has been the issue that these types of adaptations have always struggled with, right? I mean, when you talk about adaptation in film, or if you talk about like remakes in film, like I've always been of the belief that I'm not always a massive stickler when a creative decides they want to like expand on something that wasn't previously a part of whatever they are remaking or sort of adapting. But to your point, like when you think about that Welcome to Raccoon City, it's like when you start rewriting characters that have been an integral part of the story of Resident Evil for 20, 30 years, it's like that's a pretty huge deviation in a way that almost shows a misunderstanding of that character, which at that point, that's not the kind of thing that would be, certainly accepted by the masses. And also just for me personally, like I don't understand the need for something like that. And I suppose what also has been a struggle of adaptations has always been, and we're starting to see a little bit of a shift maybe, but I think that for the most part, it's like, well, you're either telling a story that's very accurate to the source material, or you're presenting something that visually is in line with the
Mm.
stylistic tendencies of the film, of the game rather. And the obvious example of that for me would be the original Silent Hill film, right?
Mm.
Christoph Gans's, I think it's 2007, 2008 film, because of the fact that I think that's a pretty awful narrative. I think that, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of Silent Hill, right? The whole inclusion of
Mm.
Pyramid Head being there. You and I have talked about that at length a lot. But at the same time, I like that film because of the fact that I think that it nails the look of Silent Hill, of the original game and whatnot, and the sort of like stylistic aesthetic of that world and the presentation of that, especially like just the transitioning between the real world and the else world or the other world. So like visually speaking, I really dig that film. However, again, it's this kind of like half full, half empty kind of glass of like, well, is it a good adaptation? Well, it doesn't tell a good story, doesn't have
Mm.
good performances, but at the same time, like visually, it's very engaging and very accurate in my opinion. But as you're saying, that is that's an issue that I think these types of adaptations have always had, and to the point where I've been so disappointed by video game movies that there have been other films that aren't technically video games, but they might as well be because they carry the
Mm.
sort of like logic of that. Thinking about like 2017's Kong Skull Island, I always found that that was almost like this like beat 'em up monster game, kind of the way that Kong's fighting all these different monsters and the way that the action unfolds. You have
Mm.
this like almost like God of War moment talking about influences where he's got like a turbine from a ship and he wraps a chain around
Yeah.
it and he just starts like whipping monsters with it. Even something like Edge of Tomorrow, that Tom Cruise, Emily Blunt, Doug Liman movie from like
Yeah.
2014, like that might as well be a video game. The way that he's going through this loop and he's learning the fundamentals of the world, and each time he's getting a little bit better. It's kind of like is that experience of playing a game for the first time, of learning the mechanics. So like those two films are not video game films, but they might as well be, I think, because of the structure. And you can definitely tell that they were written by and directed by people that play games.
Oh yeah,
Doug
definitely.
Liman. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say definitely a case of Jordan Vogt Roberts because
Mhm.
he stated many a time about, and he's long been on to make a Metal Gear Solid film,
Yeah.
which has never sort of happened, unfortunately. And maybe it's probably for the best of Konami's track record, but
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I mean, there's like there's an Easter egg for the game Journey in
Mhm.
Kong Skull Island. The mountain in the background is the same mountain from that, for instance. So,
Right.
which is one of my favorite little video game Easter eggs. But yeah, sorry, and Doug Lyman, you were saying as well.
I was just saying, he's somebody that's had his foot in, lots of different fandoms and geekdoms, right? So like
Mm.
it's not a stretch to say that, he would be well versed in that regard. And I mean, for me, it's funny, like my favorite horror, thinking about horror game adaptations for a film would be probably, at least my top three would be something like Werewolves Within, which, that's
Mm.
like basically based off of a card game. It's not, and
Yeah.
there's a video game adaptation now, but it's just one of those things where it's like, fundamentally understands the framework of it, and then the fact that that plays out like, a game of Werewolves Within would. It
Yeah.
just shows like a fundamental understanding of what makes those games work, and presenting them in a way that, in case of Werewolves Within, is a comical and kind of like rivals the experience of playing a party game that can be chaotic, and the funny scariness of how things can kind of unfold at a moment's notice when people start backstabbing or whatnot.
Yeah, and that reminds me now you say that about the Until Dawn movie from last year, where it's like
Mm.
that was like a shoe-in to do the film a certain way,
Mhm.
like especially in an interactive era. I mean, we did get the people behind a lot of those FMV Wales interactive games, like
Yeah.
some of them made one as well. But in this case, yeah, you could have done a choose your own adventure movie like that, right there, but they turned it into something else entirely, and just yeah, the actual game stuff was barely in it, and it was annoying. But I think on that, it did remind me. I think when we first talked about like video game horror, maybe sort of adaptations, I think it was probably back 5 years ago when we were starting. We did an episode where we sort of talked a bit about it. And I said then, the first sort of time I ever got to review a film over any website was at Bloody Disgusting for the adaptation of Detention, Red
Mm.
Candles game, which I still think, in terms of like being faithful, is probably one of the most faithful in terms of like telling the story as is, and given it's quite a politically charged story as well. Like
Mm.
it's interesting and fascinating. And when we talk about like good writing in games, like there's a great example of using that in a way that works. And ironically, it's being a Silent Hill derivative in that regard, the way you can say, okay, so yeah, the monster is trauma or history or whatever, and like that's fine, but it works so well, and it's just there, very underseen as film go, as horror adaptations go. But yeah, that was fantastic. I think for what it was, like as good as it was ever going to be.
Mm.
Um, I've heard good things about the Exit 8 film, quite ironically, but again, very simple premise. I
Yeah.
think that can help sometimes if you've got a very, very simple premise that you can just sort of test out in different ways. I mean, it's just we've established there's lots of terrible ones, and Paul W.S. Anderson's had his hand in a few, unfortunately. In terms of, he's done Resident Evil. Mortal Kombat wasn't terrible, but
Yeah.
and the Monster Hunter movie, well, again, it was not Monster Hunter, like
Yeah.
really, in that sense. It was, it was funny that it was almost like Capcom turned to him and said, "Hey, could you put Mila Jovovich in another film where she's dominating every character we've already established," like sort of thing. But yeah, I think we are seeing a bit more respect shown. Like I think the fact that the horror ones seem to be doing well. The Five Nights at Freddy's films, quality be damned, they're doing well in ways that others hadn't. You think about that first film, the fact that they released it day and date in cinemas and on streaming, and it still fucking did gangbusters. Like it's so it's catering to audiences. I think is the smartest way. If you're going to make it financially successful, you have to have the right tools behind it. Like so for the sequel, saying, "Oh, the creators involved." For many people that might be a put off given his politics, but
Mm.
for younger fans who don't really get into that bit of it, I suppose, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, that's cool." So we can get that, and then obviously it's just like a parade of like pointing at the screen, going, it's that thing, it's that thing." I can evidence that by my old daughter sitting watching it with me and pretty much going, "This, that," which is fun. Yeah, it's nice to see someone sort of doing that to a film, but yeah, that's fine. But yeah, finding your audience, finding how to sort of get there with it. Yeah, maybe we'll get a good sort of run of things as time goes on. But who knows? Who knows?
Well, I guess that'll lead us right into, the films that you got to see recently. I guess that'll give us somewhat of an idea of like how video game film adaptations have been going within this year, 2026.
Yeah. What would you like me to start with? I guess is the point.
Oh gosh. Let's start with the film that I've heard less about, which would be Iron in terms of the reception. That would be Iron Lung.
Yeah, that feels like the right way around for me in terms of how to do this. So yeah, Iron Lung is directed by Mark Fishback, who's also known to pretty much everyone as Markiplier,
Mhm.
the YouTubers. He also stars in the film alongside the likes of Troy Baker, Karen Kaplan, Elsie Lovelock, and Alana Pierce, who all sort of largely feature in voice roles. Yeah, it's mainly Mark on screen. It's based on the short 2022 horror game of the same name by Dave Szymanski, who is creator of Dusk and games like Squirrel Stapler. Obviously, we covered Dusk before. And in both the game and the film, it concerns this post-apocalyptic future where what life remains is dwindling in the aftermath of this event known as the Quiet Rapture. But basically, if you weren't on a space station, you were just gone, sort of thing. And so a convict who is played by Markiplier is sentenced to search for resources on this desolate moon that has, in a big trailer voice, an ocean of blood, sort of thing. And I mean, that's pretty much how they do it in the film, narration wise. And so he's welded inside this rickety submarine known as the Iron Lung with no viewing porthole because of the pressure. And he's got to navigate this blood ocean, taking snapshots of these particular locations. This is again is basically the plot of the game as well at that point. But obviously, as he goes around, he finds that he's not alone down there. So, firstly, I think it's wild, that we got a movie about Iron Lung. We're talking about all these big name adaptations and dreaming about can they get it right on the 50th different Resident Evil movie. Like his not, I mean, it is probably the biggest game Dave Szymanski's done, just in terms of like numbers, because Markiplier was a big reason behind that, having streamed it in the first place. But it was a short experiment, after doing Dusk, and it turned out to be this gangbusters thing that is, as we talk right now, has like done 3 times its budget at the box office on its opening weekend, which is amazing. It's, I mean, and the fact that it's on a cinema screen as well, because no distributor, Markiplier has basically funded this himself and put it up, got it into cinemas. Sheer popularity of him has done that. And when I say about finding the right audience, there it is. Because I went to what was the second screening on the Friday night, and it was packed. Like for a small horror movie that if you had seen the game stream, it's like you'd be like 2-hour horror movie based on this. This might be interesting, sort of thing. But they were there for Markiplier. I definitely thought I was in the minority. It was like, ooh, I'd like to see how he turns Iron Lung into a movie, sort of thing, like that. But I don't much worry about Markiplier in that terms. But I think he's been very healthy for sort of promoting a lot of horror games over the years, and that's I think he's partly responsible for in helping that sort of indie run that we had in the 2010s that really pushed the medium back up again, and a lot of the games we've loved in that time, he's been there and promoted because of a healthy love of it. So if you've played the game and seen the runtime of the film, as I said, you might sort of raise an eyebrow or two, I think, because the game itself clocks into about an hour, I think.
Roughly.
And the film is just over 2 hours. So, I mean, it almost writes the criticism ahead of the film. Like you're padding the story with something. Sort of surely there's unrelated stuff that's breaking the chamber piece nature of this story, and that's only partly true. I think I think the question of how this film fills 2 hours is answered basically by Markiplier stuffing the lore that Szymanski added after the game came out. There was like this lore update where you could go on a computer screen and find out all this, search certain terms and find out certain information about the wider world beyond the submarine and all the things that have gone on in this weird rapture.
Right.
And so, that helps because it gives us this richer view of this dying universe beyond this sort of fleeting glimpses we get in this little rusty tin can. So, partway through the story, we get more human interaction so as well, rather than just being him there on his own. He briefly gets to come back up and interact with a few other people who've sent him down, but it never leaves the sub. It's always from his perspective. It's still a bit blurry. You can't really see everything. And but it's the first instance where you're like, oh, okay, so this is like what we're doing, because at the beginning you're kind of thinking, oh, they're kind of speeding through some of the stuff in the game already. Like it feels like we're not going to take long to get to that point. So yeah, with that, like I said, it's crucial that we don't leave the confines of the submarine all that often. I think there's probably a few shots where we do, to see from an outside perspective, and they're all important moments to do that. I think they don't just come arbitrarily. There's a real focus on what matters here, which is, when I talk about positives, there's a dedication to creating that limited environment of the game. Help building this sort of suffocating, claustrophobic feeling. Like I felt it, like sitting there, just felt very tight with it, like that, and not really having an escape from it because it doesn't really get out there. And with that runtime, it's using that time to slowly boil up the tension, and at its best, I think the audio-visual nature of it just sort of all blends. It nails the atmosphere that you'd expect, and I think Andrew Holshot was in for the score as well here, and it really, which is great, like to get into like this big score for this. And it really gets to stick in those moments and adds to it. I mean, like, honest to God, the most Doom-esque thing, like at the beginning and the end of this film, like in terms of the score and the imagery, like it's proper satanic looking shit, and it's like lovely. Like these loud bookends to this slow build storytelling. And I think certainly the finale makes for this pretty sort of literally bloody, satisfying payoff after a bit of a slog to get there. But it probably wouldn't be a slog if the story overall was like better constructed and consistently well presented. Because I think around the midway point, things start getting a bit muddled and muffled, I think, as well. Where Markiplier starts stacking too much of this lore onto a thin premise. The thin premise is what is the hook of this, like sub, blood moon, thing in the blood moon, sort of thing, and that's it, like that. And that's all you need, really. But it's great to have a little extra context, but I think he just starts adding more to it, and it becomes a bit more Dead Spacey, in terms of like what is real, what isn't, sort of thing. And on that, it kind of at a point effectively resets the tension levels. A really aggravating point in the story where it was needing to sort of just keep building, just keep ticking over, and it just kind of stops, resets, and starts it again. It's like a bit late to be starting it again at this point. And in that time, the audio mix, which has been really good up to that point, in terms of like really conveying this tight space and the creaks and the groans and the noises, and the score's great, but there's just so many overlapping voices and noises and you just can't hear what's going on. Like obviously I'm half deaf anyway, and it's sometimes hard to hear stuff in the cinema. But yeah, it was just like the mix was terrible at that point. I mean, I suspect it was the point at that, because of what was going on, but I really did sort of struggle with that. I go back to the length of this and say, it's very easy to say that a film should be shorter or longer. And, while I'm tempted to say that a tighter film would have probably had a stronger impact with this, I do think he's earned the right to pace this however he wants, because he helped bring this small indie horror game to the big screen, and largely does it more successfully than a lot of bigger name games have done in adapting to film. And that's the beautiful thing about it, I think, is it wasn't like amazing or anything. I was suspecting it was going to get really good and really like pay it off, but it did take a dip, unfortunately, that didn't justify that runtime. But again, like I said, his choice. He funded. This is what happens when you don't have studio interference, I guess. And as a result, yes, maybe there should have been someone in his ear saying, maybe you could move a few of these pieces around, maybe take some of these out, and we could have got a different film. But then, like I said, who else is going to do that? The only way with the small budget, makes the most of it, captures the essence of what's going on. Yeah, I mean, I'm just very happy to see what is, what we would effectively call a horror bite
Mm,
become this like box office sensation, for
mm,
what it is, and really taking on a lot of money. It's just great. And I don't know if word of mouth means it won't really do very well after that, because
mm.
I've seen plenty of reviews which are I love Markiplier, but sort of
Right.
thing with this film. But I think that's because they expected something very particular because it's Markiplier, and he does
Mm,
things a very certain way. But no, I think he's got to be commended for like sticking to his guns and really making the film he wanted to. It doesn't mean it's any better than it could have been, but
mm.
I think it's in the context of what it is compared to the other film that we covered. It's amazing that it exists and got to be the film it is.
Right. Yeah, no, I think my main question for you was going to be, how does he handle directing a feature film for the first time? And it sounds like, it sounds as if like his passion clearly for the game and whatnot came through, right? It's also the fact though that like maybe it's the same type of mistake that a lot of first time directors
Mm.
make, whether it's, we're talking about video game film adaptations or not. It's like trying to do a little too much, perhaps, expanding on my hope with this would have been that it's like, yeah, it's all about the atmosphere, right? Because that's what made the game so great. It's all about, having this short, very sort of like punchy experience that really does kind of like facilitate that deep sea dread and whatnot, playing around with the atmosphere, single location. And so to hear like maybe it expands on some of the lore and whatnot a bit more than it should and gets a little carried away in that regard. Um, I don't think that's terribly surprising.
Mm.
But at the same time, like it sounds like he's able to at least do right by presenting Iron Lung in a way that is along the lines of the experience in the game. I guess, does he add anything to this that maybe isn't present in the game, whether that's narratively speaking or, just the general premise of Iron Lung? Does he sort of like include something that's not in the game?
Just in being a more vocal protagonist,
Mm,
I suppose it is more of a thing, getting more of his backstory, the
mhm,
characters, the convict, having these other characters come in back and forth, and having this sort of untrustworthy, which of you are real people, which of you aren't. There's only maybe once where you can say that for sure when he does see them,
mhm,
sort of thing. But yeah, there's some little story elements that are added that change the dynamic and sort of question why he'd carry on, sort of thing. Obviously a lot of it's not in his power. He's made to do what he's doing because he's been told he's got to go down here as a sort of criminal charge. But yeah, they basically just go into explaining more about why he's and the sort of politics behind everything that's happened and this frustrating need to sort of work together, but whilst also being opposed in how you view this big rapture thing that's happened.
mhm,
And yeah, it's got some bits to it that definitely add. But I do think in terms of like the character, the convict himself, it's like it does give him a bit too much,
mhm,
and give him a bit too much. Makes for a cool sort of like some very cool imagery in the finale. But
mhm.
yeah, it's like there were probably smoother ways to get there like that. But
Sure.
it's I don't know. It just means it doesn't make as much sense as it did. In
Mm,
the very simple original game, it was like there's something out there, there's something out there, something out there. Kind of see it, can't see it, kind of see it. I mean, something I didn't know. I think when I first played the game was like the nature of the camera.
mhm,
That why it is you see certain things the way you do,
mm,
like that. I won't spoil it in case people don't know this, but yeah, it's just like it makes the sort of encounters down there creepier in a way that's like quite fascinating, and it has this little story extra point that really does something very dumb with the camera like that, and but only because he's not given the information ahead of time about it.
mhm,
But yeah, it's like, he's clearly very much into the idea and really wants to make this story and really wants to do something cool with it. And like I said, it's mad. And like I said, seeing Andrew Hulshult getting to do a motion picture score,
mhm.
like it's fantastic. Even though it's not always like welcome in moments where it should be, sort of thing. It's like
Mhm.
I think it's like you can tell that combination they've had of like love of old school first person shooters and their music definitely is playing into it a
Mm.
little. Yeah. Um, I'd be very curious to see what Markiplier does again if he ever does another feature length film, which I imagine he will, because I, I can see how he's done this and think, yeah, maybe do something. I know he does. He's done his own sort of short films and stuff on his YouTube channel. Like,
Mhm.
they aren't video game related and stuff. But yeah, to sort of go into something like this and I think succeed in one form or another. Yeah, great.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's one of those things where it's just like at the very end of the day, even if an adaptation maybe doesn't go the way that you would particularly like it to, or faithfully speaking, like at the end of the day, does he seem like his skill set has transitioned over to film and being a director? And it sounds like for you it has. So that's
Yeah, generally, definitely
generally
things.
speaking.
Yeah, definitely got things to learn. But I
Yes.
think you know he still manages to fit pretty much everything that the game had, which
Mm.
is easy because the game is like simple. But
Right.
so it's just the way of adding those things in on top of it that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't.
Mm. That's great. Yeah. No, I'm happy to hear that. And I'll definitely, if I get some screenings around me, or at the very least when it comes out on on demand, I'd be interested to go
Mm.
and see to check this one out for myself. But since we've gone a while already, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we can dive right into your next film. Which if anybody's been on the internet recently, there's lots of viewpoints on Return to Silent Hill and how well of a continuation of the Silent Hill storyline that one has built upon and sort of like presented. So yeah, we'll have more on that in our grab bag of games after the break. And we're back from our break. And Neil, how did Christoph Gans do his second time around playing in the world of Silent Hill with his new film, Return to Silent Hill, which is adapting the most beloved Silent Hill of all, Silent Hill 2?
Yes, and of course, Christoph Gans, who had previously helmed films like Brotherhood of the Wolf and his version of Beauty and the Beast with Lea Seydoux. And yeah, he obviously made the 2006 Silent Hill film, which blended bits of the first two games and was long thought of as one of those better video game adaptations. Personally, I like it less with every viewing, and I kind of suspect I'll like it less after having seen this. But so yeah, as you say, Return to Silent Hill is based on the mighty Silent Hill 2, which again is often cited as one of the greatest horror games of all time. We know we've covered it plenty of times to say so. So reportedly, the decision to remake the game that Bloober made, which is great, obviously, was part of a plan to support the release of this new film. And while I'm not entirely sure if that's true, it would be rather funny considering the outcome. Um, basic story in the film remains the same. A widowed man, James Sutherland, played here by Jeremy Irvin, who's had such horror high watermarks like Baghead and The Woman in Black 2 and Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, receives a letter from his dead wife, Mary, who is played by Hannah Emily Anderson, who's been in Jigsaw and X-Men Dark Phoenix. So you may sense a pattern here. So she tells him to meet her at their special place, which is, of course, the town of Silent Hill. But, of course, when James gets there, he finds the town isn't quite as picturesque as he remembered it. So when Bloober Team was announced as the developer of the Silent Hill 2 remake, Silent Hill fans were largely apocalyptically mad about that. It's fair to say, as we've talked about a few times on this podcast. There were plenty of jokes about what sort of blunt force trauma Bloober would do to this sophisticated psychological horror game. Which, to be fair, it was understandable,
Mm.
but ultimately overblown when it came down to it. But so now you think about this: Christoph Gans returning to make his own version of Silent Hill 2 20 years after having a success, so to speak, with the first one. That was met with a lot less resistance. Yeah, that was seen as good news, sort of things. And so the beautiful irony here is that Christoph Gans' return to Silent Hill bastardizes Silent Hill 2's story in a way the fans pretty much could have had fevered nightmares about Bloober doing. Yeah, the film opens with this meet cute between James and Mary in a, I suppose, a flashback, if you will. So quickly, you sort of know it's not going one for one with the game structure, which, fine. We've had the remake. Doing things exactly the same would be a bit pointless. I get that. But there's an offness about the thing in the opening 30 minutes that actually felt encouraging. It was weird, a bit naff, and had this dreamlike sort of surreal air before we even get into the town. So at that point, it was still sort of questionable what the intent was. And yeah, while it remixes certain ideas from the game, it was close enough that at that point it wasn't jarring. There's some dodgy bits in there, but you could sort of go, okay, lower budget, questionable, sure, but it's doing something. Things pretty much head downhill after we get to the town of Silent Hill. I mean, the variations on a theme become entirely new branches that contradict the point of the original story. Gans and company actually, they seem repulsed at the idea of being faithful to the game. Like anytime they stray too close, they sort of vomit up a barrier like that and do something that's wild, like to change it. And again, I'm not going to go into why and hows because you'd have to see the film. I don't want you to see the film, but you should see the film if you want to know what they are. So, I mean, it's genuinely sort of staggering how much wrong Gans gets. I mean, the introduction of Pyramid Head, it's how that is in the game. It's that whole sort of him. He's just standing there like that. They make that into a little action sequence. Yeah, there's these tone deaf alterations to James and Mary's story. They are the big crux of what's wrong with this film, and they just get worse as it goes on. And then you have the underwhelming use of other characters. The Laura, Angela, Eddie, Maria. I mean, Eddie is in it for a scene, and it's like he might as well have not been there. Like, there's no point to. It's like it was just one of the we have to get Eddie in here somehow. And I mean, take your pick out of any of the stinkers, the lot in that. But obviously, the same actress is playing most of the female characters, so it's just varying kinds of bad at that point. So just after seeing it, I likened it to sort of asking for someone saying, I would like an intricate themed Lego set, and then someone instead decides to make this sort of ad hoc diorama made of bricks, Play-Doh, and Unreal Engine sort of thing. It's not the thing you asked for. It's got some of the bits in it, but it's just not the same thing. It's a very, very bad film. And as adaptations go, it's not even a saving grace that it has Akira Yamaoka's score in it, which apparently is a separate score, as well, which I don't. Fair enough, but. Yeah, so you get all the certain beats, and that's great, sure, but it feels insulting that it's even there. It really is, and it sounds like hyperbole to sort of talk about it like this and say, "Oh yeah," and you've heard all the stuff online, and I really did want to give it a chance, and like I said, partway through watching it, I was like, "Okay, I could see it could be going somewhere with this," but it's just wrong in so many ways. I mean. It carves up subtlety and douses it in petrol. Basically, it just nothing that you would expect from that story, which is subtle in so many ways, whilst fairly obvious in others. But just none of it. And honest to God, the ending it's a meme already. If you've seen where it pretty much is the I can't remember which CSI it is. The one with the guy with the sunglasses thing.
On Miami.
Yeah, that's it. So, and see, I only know it from the memes. With the idea of he says a punchline pun, and then the music kicks in, and he puts his sunglasses on, sort of thing. Honest to God, the film basically ends like that. And it almost feels like I don't know if it was just like Christoph Gans turning around and going, "Got your money," sort of thing. But it did feel like that for a minute, just like, and I mean, lucky for me, I've seen worse films this year already, which is saying something. But
Mm,
and the only reason I can say they were worse is because they were blatantly using AI, like
mhm,
in their CG. This is just bad because of how little it understands the source material like
mm,
that. It again, when we were talking earlier about like having the elements there, but
mhm,
not necessarily using them right, it's just absolute misuse. And yeah, they fit more of the stuff in than they did with the first film,
mm.
and certainly better than Revelations or whatever it was. But yeah, it's the use of those things that makes it worse than either of those films. It's yeah, awful stuff.
That's very disheartening to hear because naturally, we waited a long while for this, and the big thing was is that if you're going to invoke the name of Silent Hill 2, as Bloober Team found out, like there's going to be a fair bit of skepticism surrounding that project. So like if you're going to do that and take that on, then you need to be well equipped to actually you know handle the job that you signed up for. And so it's
Mm.
disheartening, not only from a narrative perspective, not that early on I did not have a great deal of sort of like hope for this, narratively speaking, because of the
Yeah,
fact of just like what I had seen from it. And I was like, I don't know about that. But I think, at the end of the day, like I said, I was a fan of his first crack at Silent Hill. So I was like, yeah, okay, this is not going to be probably very narratively faithful in that regard. However, I think previously, like he did nail the visual look of it. And yet, even here, like from what granted, I haven't seen it. I've seen stuff online for it. But like even just the way that the film looks, it looks very cheap in a way
mm.
that you would not expect it to, given that it had a budget of, not a meager budget. I'll leave it at that. I don't have the exact figure on
Yeah.
hand, but it
I think it is less than the previous films.
sure.
So in fairness to that, but
Still 23. I'm looking
yeah,
at it now. Like 23
yeah.
million is not a
Well,
insignificant budget.
well, when you think the way they're talking about Iron Lung, the
Mhm.
budget is like obviously very different in many
Yeah.
ways, but yeah, I think it's barely a 23rd of that. So
Mm.
it's quite remarkable that there is such, but it's a common problem, the
Yeah.
bloat and waste of money in these circles. But yeah, there are moments where you go, okay, this kind of evokes that sort of when you get the first sort of transition into the other world. There's a little bit of interesting stuff in terms of how it
Mhm.
like affects things, but I don't know. The first time you see the basic foes, and it's like it feels like you've just used the models from the game, like
Mhm.
literally the models from the game. There's a lot of stuff that does feel like they've just put people in front of like like if you get YouTube videos of people inserting themselves into games and films and stuff, it's like that. Like there's certain bits like, yeah, this looks good, but I think it's because they've literally just lifted a scene from the game. Like they're like that's all it is. Like, which is fine,
Mhm.
but yeah, one of the big things that really annoyed me, I suppose, is like James as a character. He's quite nonplussed, in the
Mm.
game. Like all this weird shit happens. He's not like freaking out and reacting weird to it. Here he's just so emotional like
Mm.
that. And yeah, there's this whole depression scene in a flashback where you've probably seen the notorious pictures of like the fake beard they put on him.
Mhm. Yep.
And it's like, oh my god, it's like, I mean, in a world, yes, you could see it being like end up being a sort of cult classic in terms
Mm.
of like, hey, it's so bad it's good, but I don't think anyone who loves Silent Hill will appreciate it that way.
Right.
And I think I certainly people who come into it afterwards and said, "Well, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be." I understand that because
Mhm.
I thought for a while I was thinking because by the time I'd watched it the day it came out and it's still like I'd heard some of the things and thinking, "Oh yeah, this doesn't seem as bad as people were making out." But I think it's just like it's how much you care, I suppose, about Silent Hill 2. That maybe the more you watch, you go, "Oh no, oh no, oh no," sort of thing.
Mm.
Like this. I mean, it like I said, it completely derails the point of the game. Like, so
Mhm.
why are you telling the story? Like, sort of thing. Like that, which I get is probably an attempt to subvert it, but it's like, if you do that, you really need to change something more. And you really have to do it in a time with probably a longer runtime. It's the opposite problem. It's like for the amount of stuff they had, they needed a longer runtime, and it was very
Yeah.
clear at a certain point in the film. It was like, how are you going to get through the rest of this? Like, how are you going to get to that bit and that monster and this boss fight and stuff like that? The answer is we'll just bundle all this stuff together, and some of it won't even make sense by the compared to the game. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, that clear distinction and delineation between characters is just not there. It's like because it's the same actress, obviously playing the different versions of a character. Like, it's kind of ruins that sort of subtlety, where the game kind of does make them look a little bit different,
Mhm.
like that, and yeah, I could go on forever. I'd just be saying the same things. I think
Yeah.
it's horrendous. Yes, there have been worse video game movies, but I think in terms of like missing the point, this is pretty fucking high. Like,
Right. Ugh. Well, that is a monumental bummer. Again, it's and an uneven sort of trajectory for Silent Hill in terms of like trying to adapt that in a way that much as we've said, the majority of trying to adapt horror games for the big screen. But to hear that this latest crack at it can't even nail it from a narrative standpoint, which more or less expected, but also just like the visual side of things is not fantastic to say the least, and especially like Christoph Gans. Like I don't know how you can return to the well in this regard and not have like learned something significant from doing this already once playing around in this universe. I mean, and
I
especially
mean,
like thinking about a lot of like the press for this game. It's just like him talking about going back and understanding the importance, the significance. I always disregard whenever a director mentions like they're a gamer or whatever, because that's usually just bullshit. But um, it's just disheartening to hear because, yeah, like you said, it's a very beloved uh, game and obviously story, and to not deliver on any regard is quite unfortunate.
yeah, I mean, he hasn't done a film in 12 years, as
Mm.
far as I can see, which was his Beauty and the Beast thing, and like it's been 20 years since he did the first one. He's not exactly a prolific director, and to be honest, I mean, he was in line to make a Fatal Frame film, I think, as well, which is like
Mm.
worrying slightly.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, if ever a film needs to kind of be Japanese centric, that it'd be that one. But yeah, he's not exactly got a great track record. I mean, Brotherhood of the Wolf was obviously a great success, but yeah, that was 25 years ago, and even then, that's a very, to be honest, his tone issues, you could see them back then, like
Mm.
that, in terms of like that film is like notorious for its tone being all over the place. But yeah, um, this is it doesn't have any of the problem. I think the budget was bigger on that one. To be honest, so it
Ugh.
wouldn't surprise me. But yeah, hey, they can't all be winners. But they certainly can't many of them can't have many of them be very good at things either.
I guess in rounding out our chat about film adaptations of video games, like what is the one lesson that other would be aspiring directors or directors that maybe want to throw their hat into the ring in that regard can learn from Mark Plyer's crack at Iron Lung?
Take a simple premise,
Mm.
keep it simple, use the same tools. I think it's like use the tools that make effective horror by
Mm.
keeping it simple. You don't need a lot more. You can hint at stuff visually, I think, in a way that, as much as I think there's barely a plot in the second Five Nights at Freddy's movie, it at least gives that audience what it wants
Mm.
and says, "Here you go. Here's a bunch of stuff that anyone who doesn't have a clue what the games are about would be going, why is this important? Why are they doing a big musical stab for this thing being revealed?" That's like
Mm.
like, but I think Iron Lung shows that people wouldn't show up because it's Iron Lung. As I said, it's like if it wasn't Markiplier involved, it would not have got out onto a cinema screen. It would have been something else entirely,
Mhm.
and which is fine. And but in fact, in all likelihood, it probably would not have existed as a movie.
Mm.
Let's be honest, because it's not even like the game that's, I suppose it probably is synonymous with Szymanski now, but like it wouldn't be the game that I would think of him with. Dusk is that game, for me. But
Mm.
it's still now, because of cultural shift that happened with it because of YouTube, it makes sense. I mean, that's video games in the modern era is probably where you look. It's like YouTube can do that, and YouTubers can do that. Not all YouTubers are very good at making films, as we saw with Chris Duckman and
Mm.
Shelby Oaks, which was so generic. I mean, that's the opposite thing you could say with Iron Lung. It's like it's doing its own thing. There's
Yeah.
ambition, at least in trying to make this and self-funding it as well. But yeah, yeah. It, I think you just the games with the simpler stories, I think, are the ones that might work best. If I'm right in saying, like that, I said that X8 movie is another example of that, where it's like, yeah, that is like ridiculously simple, as we discussed, I think, in an episode.
Mhm.
And yeah, I haven't seen it myself yet because I don't think it's come out here, but it's done all right reviews wise.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, cool. And yeah, keep it short, I guess. Like it's like it's like, especially if you do have a very simple premise,
Mm.
unless you have something tangible to make it 2 hours long, you don't
Yeah.
need to make it 2 hours long. And yeah, Markiplier probably did have enough material to make it 2 hours long, but probably not in the order he did it.
Yeah, I think, generally speaking, not that I have much experience in directing films, but if your inclination is to go longer, probably fight that, fight that feeling, because very rarely does that pay off well. But no, I would agree with what you're saying. Right? It's like keep it simple, make sure that you're really hitting on what makes this game specifically like very unique, and kind of like hit that, but don't let that obviously sort of outstay its welcome in that regard. But
Yeah. And sorry, I will also add, it's like
mm,
you don't have to make your characters likable just because the XX say that's a good idea.
yeah,
People won't like it if people don't like the people in it. It's like you can try and make likable people in the fucking most horrendous things in the film. Like, if the story calls for flawed and that's what makes it interesting, and this is a big thing at Return to Silent Hill, if your main character has issues, and is not a good person inherently, you should not spend your entire film trying to make them a good person like that. It's you're completely missing the point of the story, and
mm,
the horror of it. The horror is like, yeah, you can be wrong and do
mm,
wrong things. Yeah, and for a minute in that film, though, it was like I was thinking, I can kind of see why you justify this, why you justify the change, and because you can make mistakes, you can do terrible things and not mean to do them, but
mm.
trying to absolve, nah, come on, no, you've got to be true to the source in that way. I think you have to make sure that your characters are nasty assholes. Let them be nasty assholes.
Well put. But yeah, that's going to round out our chat about film adaptations. But we can still chat about plenty of horror games that we've been playing this week. So,
Mm.
Neil, what is something that you got around to playing this week?
So I played a couple of like pretty early build demos sort of things. The first one I played was Hungry Horrors
Mm,
on Steam, which is by Clumsy Bear Studio. It's a card-based adventure, so it's an RPG sort of thing. It's based on British and Irish folklore. So you have deck building and cooking with a narrative, basically, and this sort of roguelike progression to it. So basically, this princess who escapes from a dungeon, and you come across monsters, but instead of fighting them, you feed them using ingredients. And all these monsters are basically, like I said, are based on like monsters of British and Irish folklore. So you have some really cool designs in this sort of 2D pixel art RPG style game. So yeah, it's just like turn-based combat. You have your deck of cards and you combine them to make different sort of meals, effectively, and ingredients. Now, each monster has stuff they prefer, so you can basically fill this bar up before they get to you and eat you. It's actually, I mean, yeah, it's basically instant death once they get to you. Some really fun death animations in that regard. And yeah, it does some funky things with that. It's obviously the humor is a certain way as a result of this sort of subversion. Uh, so yeah, having the threat of death whilst not having to engage in combat in this, but having a solution, a weapon, so to speak, that is just feeding something, like, is interesting, and it kind of works well for what it is. Like, it's still an early access, so there's obviously stuff to be sort of weeded out. But yeah, already there's this really strong identity of what they want to do, and like these monsters of folklore are just really well designed already. And as a card game, yeah, they explain the rules pretty well early on in terms of like, certain things can make them crave different things. So like you can make them crave a salty food, or like you can negate like the buffs they have on certain types of food. It's yeah, it's applying normal rules
Mhm.
of like card-based games, but with food. And
Yeah.
it's a simple change, but it is quite fun. And like I said, because it has this weird sort of sense of humor and sort of approach to the game, I quite like what it's doing. I've played a few hours of it. Like I said, it's still early in its development, but yeah, quite enjoyed it.
Yeah, I actually got to spend some time with this one as well because I'm kind of a sucker for card-based games, and yeah, I found that sort of like blending of Magic the Gathering with this kind of like Iron Chef premise was quite cool, especially with the obviously RPG
Mm,
aspects to sort of just like the world in general. There's a little bit of that horror tinge there for the monsters as well. Like there's a skinless horse and horseman at one
mm.
point that will pop up, and so I'm interested to see like how the horror aspect of it is going to apply to some other monsters and whatnot. But yeah, I thought that it was really neat in terms of having to get a handle on the sort of like the likes of certain monsters, or if you play a certain type of card, like for example, haggis is like a hearty
Yeah.
meal. So then you need to follow it up with like playing a card that has that is like sweet. So like then I went to
Mm,
use summer pudding or something, and so like you get to have a variety of sort of like give and takes that kind of dictate what you should play next, right? It's not just like play the strongest card; it's play the smartest card, because as you're fighting enemies, the closer they get to you, with each turn that passes, the more likely you're going to start taking some pretty heavy damage.
mm.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, let me slay a dragon with a Yorkshire pudding, so that's a pretty cool experience in my book. But yeah, no, I liked that. I thought that was a cool blending of cards, horror, and at the same time, this like interesting culinary spin on a formula that's kind of familiar, but at the end of the day, it's about the originality that developers can apply to it. And for that matter, these were, I think it's a game by two developers,
Yeah, I
a
think it's a
team of
small
two.
team.
So
Yeah, it's a small team with that one. So, yeah, it was a fun one.
yeah, that was very cool. I played
Yeah.
and spent a long, long time playing this week. This was probably the thing I spent the most amount of time playing, which was Burnhouse Lane
Mm,
from developer and publisher Harvester Games, which is a side-scrolling adventure horror game, and it focuses on an agency nurse named Angie Weather, who takes a job caring for an old man in the countryside. Though this job spirals into this like supernatural journey that really forces her to kind of confront her traumatic past and, for lack of a better phrase, and it's not much of a spoiler, but her terminal future,
mm.
which, having a narrative that has players confronting their past and, future is not that unique of a spin. But I will say that, like, this was a game that, like, if we had covered it in the year that it was released, it probably would have been my favorite games of the year because of the fact that it blends naturally, the adventure approach to horror, which we're both very much fans of, but really it has such a fantastic presentation to it.
Mm.
So its narrative concerns, this nurse, she's lost her husband, and now she's been diagnosed with cancer. So she's basically, at her wits' end. The game opens with a very bold opening of her trying to get out of that diagnosis, which, I'll leave that for the players to experience. And then, you know, the notion of Burnhouse Lane really is this like liminal sort of like purgatory space or an else world, which she's able to access periodically in just exploring the farmhouse. And so, like, at one point, you'll go through the basement and then you end up in this like weird else world that she basically learns that, she can cheat death. And so she kind of is trying to explore those options and what she can do. But in the interim, like there's this almost Alice in Wonderland aspect where she's coming across all these weird characters that have environments that are reflective of them. And it makes for a game that I think just has so many multitudes to its storytelling and in exploring its subject matter, which, to be fair, is kind of familiar in regards to what you're actually trying to navigate. I don't find that being a detriment because of the fact that the characters are so varied. And again, like each character that you meet, you will essentially be exploring an environment at a certain point that is reflective of them in some way, both good and bad. And so I think that in that way, it makes Burnhouse Lane, as a world, as a setting, so interesting because it just really did keep me kind of like guessing over and over in regards to like what would come next in a way that, I don't know, you play a lot of games with Elseworlds and at the end of the day, it's like, oh, okay, cool. That means that this version of reality is, melting, or there's just like a bunch of like weird fleshy organs on walls and stuff like that. But like, there's a really, really strong variety here for Burnhouse Lane. And it makes each chapter feel like its own like anthology almost, even though it's all connected. It's just like in one of them, the very first instance of being on Burnhouse Lane, you like go into a kebab shop and you meet this guy and it's like presents normally, but then you find out, oh, he's got his like girlfriend chained down in the basement, but she won't stop eating. So she turns into this huge monster and you're just like, oh, this is fucking weird. And then later on you meet this vicar and then he ends up being this like insane guy that's got like a sex dungeon. And then you have this whole section where you're going through this like dilapidated sex dungeon that has all these puzzles and things. And like there's a whole section about a serial killer. So you're going through the woods and you learn about the mythology of the serial killer. You learn about, people that are obsessed with them. And what really kind of like makes each of these storylines that much more engaging and more personal, I suppose, is that in true adventure game fashion, your decisions actually can dictate like who lives and who dies, which is like, that's an aspect of a lot of games that you hear about, but here I find that it is presented in a manner that is a little more genuine. Each one of the characters you actually get to know, so it kind of has almost a little bit of that telltale identity to it in terms of importance given to characters. You go out of your way to make them believable that if they go missing because of a decision that you make or they die, then their loss is actually noticeable. It doesn't feel as superficial as it typically is when you worry about, people living or dying and having their hands. And, in addition to that, it influences the various endings and whatnot. And yeah, I guess like the voice acting for all these characters is really terrific as well. Again, this is like a small indie game, but at the end of the day, like it has a really, really phenomenal production value to it. And, if it wasn't already quite an impressive game to it, it features this paper craft kind of graphical style, which mixes hand-drawn drawings, hand-drawn images with like cut and pasted photos that really complement the uneasy surrealness of the world before you end up going into some of these else worlds. It's an uncomfortable game just to like be in the regular world, which I think complements, not only the horror aspect of it, but more importantly, it makes you feel a little bit like the main character does, which is the fact that, she's at odds with what to do with her life. Does she even want to keep on going? And I think that all around makes Burnhouse Lane an experience that goes above and beyond in terms of tackling subject matter that might be familiar, but the actual sort of like presentation of that and exploration of that is quite well done.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you were saying about like it almost having an anthology feeling, it's like I think that coupled with the visuals kind of reminds me of like graphic novel series sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it would be like issues effectively, like in terms of how it's handling. I see with the game they've got coming out this year, Train Watch, as well. They're keeping that style again, in a
Yep.
very different kind of game. But yeah, it's gives it an oddness, that I quite like the look of. I've had Burnhouse Lane in my library for a while, to be honest, as well. So I think it'd been on the backup list for us both. I think at some point. to play. So yeah, it's good to hear that you've had such a good time with it as well. So I'll have to get into that sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and also, not that this influenced me because I didn't know this until I started playing it, but apparently this is a game that is connected to Harvester's other games, the Cat Lady, Downfall, and Lorelei. But I have enjoyed this game for whatever the 7 or 8 hours I played of it, and didn't even know that. And so, if anything, it just makes me want to go check out those other games because I think they're all whether it's connection to the same world or thematically speaking. It's just a really strong introduction to the studio, and I couldn't recommend Burnhouse Lane enough. But what was the other game that you were playing this week?
There'll be a couple of things. Before I get to the next game, I just wanted to mention it's not a horror game, so to speak, but it has little elements I just want to quickly mention, which I played this week, which is the Game Baker's game Cairn, which is basically like a climbing simulator, narrative game. But it's beautiful for a start. In terms of horror connection, it's got music and sound design by people who worked on stuff like Limbo and Inside and Control. So it has something to it that feels a bit otherworldly, and it's very similar to Death Stranding in terms of like the traversal of environments, and it's like freeform climbing and stuff, but it has a narrative thing. Oh my god, it feels so intimidating to actually climb in this game as well, like, and so like joyous to like make any kind of progress. Like the shaking of limbs as you sort of starting to lose your balance and the pressure on your limbs is getting too much, like that. The mix of vibration in the controller and like the visual stimuli of seeing it. Oh man, it's like it's panic inducing stuff. And like when you sort of get into your like base camp stuff, and you can like if you've like climbed up like handholds and stuff that are poor for your hands, like they'll fuck the character's hands up. So you've basically got to like tape their fingers up, so you get these lovely close-ups to like their bloodied hands and like all these bumps and sores and stuff. It's like it can be really brutal and beautiful at the same time. It's just like there's little moments of horror in that. I think is what I love about it. I mean, it's a fantastic game anyway, but yeah, I think that sort of ordeal nature of it, like, and the perseverance, like it's like similar to like Baby Steps last year, which is it's not quite a genre game, but it had a lot of surrealness to it that made you think, Christ, it should have been like it's challenging and in a way that makes you want to keep going, but for very different sort of narrative reasons. So yeah, I just thought I'd mention that because I just this early in the year to have a game be that fucking good, it's just like, like it's worth mentioning. And
Nice.
given the current format, we can sort of delve into that, but not to sort of downplay the horror game I actually am going to mention next, but like, it just came into my mind. I barely mentioned the fact that I've been replaying Resident Evil Remake. Spoiler, it's great. There you go. But
Leads in that.
yeah, I know, crazy. So a demo version of the game that's coming out is called Subspecies, which I think is quite appropriate actually, given we've been talking about Iron Lung. It's a game in which you are controlling a submarine, and it's sort of like they describe it as Subnautica and Space Invaders, sort of as a blend, which I think is fairly accurate. But I think it's more in common with like modern shoot 'em ups like Resogun and stuff like that, like that sort of Super Stardust stuff, things like that. So yeah, it's like this 2.5D sort of almost Metroidvania sort of thing, but you're in this sub and you can sort of pilot it 360 degrees, and yeah. So in the story of it, it's like this alien outbreak has spread through the Earth's oceans, and like humanity has managed to put a lid on it for the time being. So it's like a passing victory. Things are going to shit on the world above. Again, this is quite interesting because it's quite close to some of the aspects of Iron Lung in terms of like finding resources in places. And yeah, you were basically like having to salvage this lost technology under the sea, which is of course where all the aliens they've basically been containing are, and all the best stuff is obviously in the nastiest places. And yeah, you have an armed submarine to keep them at bay, and like I said, you can like swivel in any direction to sort of fend them off. But yeah, it's an interesting one to look at because obviously at 2.5D it gives a nice bit of depth in terms of like the visuals. You have like you get a sense of how deep you're going the further you go into the demo, which is a couple of levels basically. One teaching you how to play the game, the other just sort of giving you a bit more of a taster of the game itself. Like the sub generally controls in a normal way, but also you have like a hovery mode so you can pick up things. And initially that's like really difficult to sort of get used to in terms of like trying to slow yourself down to get to pick things up whilst also worrying about what's coming. You've got like a little radar which tells you if something's like coming into the screen soon, but yeah, stuff comes at you fast. And yeah, there'll be upgrades and things that sort of in very shoot 'em up style. It will give you like better weaponry, better durability, etc. But yeah, I mean, the early pacing of this, obviously, because of the way the demo is quite slow, but it makes it quite manageable to sort of learn how it plays out. I mean, it remains to be seen sort of how that later exploration will pan out and if the pacing will be better. But yeah, I do expect to get more of a challenge, I think, in the main game, because I think while it's difficult at first, the mastery of it is over quite quickly. I think you kind of get the gist of what it's doing, and you're like, okay, so what else? But from on the Steam page, obviously there's gameplay videos of like stuff beyond this demo, and that shows promise. That's if it's going to be like that, and you're going to face more monstrous things. Fantastic. But like as a taster, it's not bad. Like it's just basically like play the tutorial now, like then play the game later. But I've kind of gone on about this before with demos. It's like I'd rather that than something that drops you midway through a game and makes it confusing like that, and because they don't really help an opinion on how a game goes. So at least with this, I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing how this goes, sort of thing.
Yeah, I actually played this one as well, and I enjoyed it from the sense of it being, like part Metroidvania a little bit, but also it very much had like the feel of an arcade shooter with power-ups along the lines of what you'd find in like Ikaruga or something like that, right? Like you've got this like double shot, you've got the revolving shields, and just like the various upgrades like that, I think gave it a more arcadey feel that I really enjoyed. I think also like there's a lot to work with in terms of like navigating, not only exploring the ocean, but also like the cave systems that are there. Yeah, I liked like the handling overall of the ship that you're using. I think I would highly, highly recommend people playing with a controller over a mouse and keyboard. I started with a mouse and keyboard for a little bit and then bailed on that pretty quick for the controller. But yeah, I think the handling was really great too. Playing and swapping between like the freeform mode, which gives you 360 aiming, but then you have some equipment that you have to use that only has like strafing up and down, left and right, which I think was really cool. And furthermore, like if you're going to use certain abilities like picking up crates or explosives or something to place them elsewhere, it does make you vulnerable in a way for a few moments. So it's one of those things where it's like you really do have to be aware of your surroundings, and the ways in which you master all the different aspects of your ship will naturally dictate sort of like your survival ability in that world. So yeah, that's one I'm looking forward to seeing more and playing more of. But yeah, I was just very surprised. I'm somebody that gets a little burnt out on the influx of Metroidvanias that we're always seeing. So when something is able to nail the like core gameplay aesthetic of it actually being fun and having it have that arcadey feel to it, I'm definitely in favor of those types of games over others.
Fair enough. Do you have anything else for us?
Yeah, the only other thing that I spent some time playing this week, and since it's so short, I played it a couple of times, was looking up I See Only a Ceiling, which is a short psychological point and click adventure game from developer Silver 978. And it focuses on a student whose wish for a distraction from their seemingly endless studies is granted in horrifying fashion as they become stuck in their apartment. So for a game such as this, like Yeah, there's some strange things that start happening in the apartment, some oddities and whatnot. But really, what this game does well, I think, in terms of its storytelling and use of horror as a vessel for the subject matter, is that the crux of the narrative is like the horror of being stuck, and that not being literally stuck in your apartment, but just like the notion that people can find themselves stuck in life, whether that's, whether it be a job, in a failing relationship, this or that. So that being the crux of the narrative, to be exploring, the psychological and mental health related topics such as like stagnation, emotional paralysis, depression induced inertia, and things along these lines. I thought that that's what made this such a smart approach to storytelling. And, in terms of like the point and click aspect of it, it's pretty straightforward. It's a short experience. It's short, but it's very replayable. So I played it 3 times, maybe in 40 minutes, something like that, because every time you go through it, there's going to be slight differences here and there to certain things. That not saying it's rewriting the experience, but you are going to be able to expand more on this aspect that you uncover, which is like the crux of the narrative and whatnot, and what that means, the supernatural aspect of it as well that comes into play. Yeah, so I thought that this was a really fun game that was, I think it's $2 whole for PC, and it's also, I believe, on mobile as well. And if you look at images for this, it would very much be at home on mobile.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess the only other thing I'll say is like there is a DLC version of the game that I wish I had bought alongside the base game. It's like, I don't know, it'll bring you up to a total of $4 or $5, I think, for the whole experience. But it introduces new environments to explore within your apartment, as well as the facet of action phases, which is described as like escaping stressful situations within a time limit. There's a couple of instances in this base game that I played where, you're supposed to have a set period of time, but that doesn't really play into gameplay. You're just faced with this dire situation, but then you have all the time you need to solve it. And had the base game had this action phase aspect to it, that probably would have added even more tension to the overall experience, which I would have been in favor of. But yeah, this was a pretty fun game to play that surprised me in more ways than once in terms of like how nuanced it was to handle its narrative and the sort of storytelling there within.
Yeah, I think it's not the first time we sort of come across these games with the sort of an anime-inspired
Mm,
look at mental health, and I think that's it's a generation that have very much grown up on these things and are inspired by them. And it's great. It's like it's created this little subgenre, and we've found some really cool stuff out of that. And this sounds like it's another one of those good ones. Like, I mean,
yeah.
as a concept and a hook, and it sounds interesting. So yeah, I'll be checking that out.
Yeah, I highly recommend that. And to what just your last point there about, thinking about the generation that something like this, who would be able to relate to it the most, like, or like myself and, growing up in the generation that like was getting cell phones as social media was becoming a big thing. Like the use of the cell phone in this game too, I think is quite good. And that, it's this reminder that you have, and I mean, back up, say it's not only your character's only connection to the outside world, but also that connection speaks to the issue that a lot of young people face with like phones and social media. It's like, not only is this your link to the outside world, but all you can access are other people's success, other people's happiness, which, that, how much of the time is that a facade that other people are putting out there? But in terms of this protagonist, like it's a constant reminder of what the protagonist himself does not have. So I thought, again, like as a commentary for mental health and exploring some of those issues there within, like I thought this was particularly effective for a game that is as brief as it is, and again speaks to the value of horror as a vessel for exploring real world horrors.
Indeed, there are plenty of those.
No shortage. But no, that's going to do it for what we've been playing this week, and naturally we got to have that nice long chat about video game film adaptations and what's worked, what hasn't, what seems to be working in the new year, and what certainly is not working still all these years later. But next week will be a slightly return to like form, I suppose, for the old show's format. And that's because we are going to be joined by a longtime friend of the show, Mr. Aaron Boehm, and we are going to be covering Dino Crisis, keeping things in the realm of survival horror, a game that if it wasn't for goodoldgames.com, I wouldn't be able to play, and just like many others. So we're going to take the opportunity to dive into that, before later in the month we dive into all things Resident Evil for the new Resi Requiem and whatnot. That'll be a fun sort of like survival horror primer for that era, and then getting to pick Aaron's brain about, what works, what doesn't work still for this game, will be a great chat as always. Before we say goodbye here, just another reminder for everybody that there's a brand new episode of Horror Bites this week, that being on Thursday. You can find that bright and early Thursday morning, and be sure to give that episode a listen. But other than that, until then, my friend, as always, it's a pleasure chatting horror with you for Safe Room.
Back at you, my man. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's main feed episode of Safe Room, and be sure to tune back in this Thursday for a new doubleheader episode of Horror Bites, our bi-weekly indie horror showcase. If you've enjoyed our horrifying discussions, please take a moment to rate and review the show on your preferred podcast platform, as it helps us immensely in ensuring the show continues to grow. For any and all show updates and additional content, you can follow Safe Room on all of our socials, which are linked in the episode notes below. And finally, you can send any and all emails to saferoompod@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.
Watch The Toxic Avenger now on Screambox. The radioactive superhero that's certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes is available to watch now from the comfort of your home. Bloody FM listeners get a special introductory offer by going to bit.ly/ToxyFM. That's bit.ly/ToxieFM for a special offer on Screambox.
Sometimes you gotta do something.